Hello, everyone. It is Mr. Stevens here. We are going to jump right back into Brothers in Arms, the lives and experiences of the men who fought the Civil War in their own words by William C. Davis. We have started. This is part 3. So we are going to jump right back in and start up on chapter 2. Chapter 2 is From Civilians to Soldiers. And we are going to jump right back into the fray here and keep reading. If you guys have not checked out parts 1 and 2, feel free to go back and do that now so you know what's going on. And we will get right to it. Chapter 2, From Civilians to Soldiers. By long-held custom among American volunteers, the men in the ranks chose their company officers, lieutenants, and captains, and then those officers elected the regimental colonel and the other field officers, lieutenant colonel and major. Often as not, the men simply elected the men responsible for raising the regiment, but there were times when ambitious men bought or bullied votes. In the 3D North Carolina Infantry, one lieutenant told a sergeant, to have the company fall in. "Men," he then addressed them, "there are 2 candidates for office, but there is but one of them worth a damn, and I nominate him. All who are in favor of electing sergeant, come to shoulder arms." That said, the lieutenant ordered, "Company, shoulder arms!" By obeying his order, the men cast their votes unanimously and without choice. It was not quite democracy in action. In the evening, Colonel Cummings meets us in our barracks and tells us that an election was only a matter of form, then put it to us by word of mouth whether or not we would sustain him, and no one daring to object, he was sustained. This is called an election. What a farce! Sergeant Henry A. Buck, Illinois Volunteer. The chap of a chasseur, one of the fancy regiments like the Zouaves, trained for rapid and intricate drill and movement on the field. Splendid officers in one of the forts outside Washington display the finery that made officers on both sides seem so dashing if not overdressed. The insignia of rank, shoulder straps, displayed an officer's standing, the lowest being the second lieutenant at left, followed by the single bar of the first lieutenant at right. Another chasseur cap, this one showing the regimental insignia of a unit from one of the big states, New York, Ohio, or Pennsylvania. Men of the 7th New York in their gray uniforms looked splendid in 1861. It was up to men like these to select the officers who would lead them to victory or defeat. In this army, 1 hole in the seat of the breeches indicates a captain, 2 holes a lieutenant, and the seat of the pants all out indicates that an individual is a private. Private Sebron Sneed, Texas Infantry, CSA. Barely did he choose, or think he had chosen, his leaders before the volunteer had his first encounter with government-issue bureaucracy, his uniform. In the South, men often simply provided their own, with rough attempts to approximate regulation colors. In practice, Confederates appeared in the field in every color of the rainbow, and sometimes several of them at once. Many wore blue, some even green, and a complete suit of regulation gray was the exception rather than the rule. In the Union, by contrast, a high degree of uniformity prevailed, except among special units like the Zouaves, fancy units outfitted in baggy pantaloons, short jackets, sashes, and fezzes, in the French-Algerian fashion. North and South, a good fit was a dream. Uniforms came in no more than 4 sizes, and almost everyone got one much too large. One Illinois man completely disappeared inside his suit, with only his ears showing to prove the clothes were inhabited. Only time, adaptation, and water shrinkage made an eventual fit. No unit in either side of the army could match the splendid Zouaves for flashy uniforms, from the turbans and fezzes on their heads to their baggy pants and white leggings. A zouave would come in many variations. This one's cap is almost regulation, but for its color. His pants are baggy, but not striped like many, and his jacket is unlike any other. Just a few of the zouave articles included tasseled caps, short coatees with colorful frogging or trim gaiters for the legs, pantaloons, and even a French infantry bugle. The first thing in the morning is drill, then drill, then drill again, then drill, drill, a little more drill, then drill, and lastly drill. Between drills we drill, and sometimes stop to eat a little and have roll call. Oliver Norton, 83rd Pennsylvania Infantry. In his first weeks in camp, the soldier, north or south, lived with fife and drum and stentorian sergeant's bawled orders constantly in his ears. Bugles woke him up at 5 a.m., sergeant shouted him out into parade ground, and then for most of the morning and afternoon he marched and marched and marched. Men with little more grasp of the rudiments of drill than those they now commanded crammed themselves at night with the rules and techniques in Hardy's tactics or Silas Casey's infantry tactics, and then the next day tried to instill it in the men. It usually started in a shambles. Some backwoods boys barely knew left foot from right, and getting them through the evolution of company, battalion, regimental, and brigade drill called for the patience of a saint. Yet it was learning to move quickly and precisely that could make men effective in battle, and which offered them their best protection against a determined enemy. A selection of the drill manuals officers use to train their volunteers. This group includes special books for infantry, artillery, and cavalry. A New Hampshire regiment practicing at regimental drill in 1862, making these volunteers think and act in unison, called for every ounce of ingenuity and persuasion from their officers. This anonymous Yankee private looks rather too small for his uniform and perhaps barely smart enough to learn his drill. Yet of such men did North and South forge great fighting armies. I went to the commissary to draw some visions, and seeing these taters, I consecrated them. Private in the 6th Kentucky Infantry, CSA. One of the pitfalls facing new volunteers and their equally new officers was the language of the military. It seemed to differ from English. Now they had to learn words like enfilade and echelon, perpendicular, and more. The Kentucky private who went to the commissary to draw some provisions and confiscated some potatoes while there, at least did not fumble his words under fire. But these men had to recognize and act on unfamiliar new words quickly at risk of their lives. They were never entirely successful. Asked how he would move his outfit to meet a foe on his right front, Lieutenant Nat Clayton of the 4th Kentucky CSA replied that, "I would move these regiment staunchendiciler to the front." A fellow Kentucky officer confessed he could not remember the right commands to give, but would risk myself and the Trigg County boys and go in on main strength and awkwardness. Officers tied bundles of hay and straw to the men's feet and taught them left from right by chanting, "Hay foot, straw foot," as they marched. However much they might look like soldiers, Johnny Reb and Billy Yank were always at heart volunteers with little patience or understanding for army ways. The common soldier, those who could write, poured out his daily experiences, including his universal frustration with things military, into his diaries and letters home. There were dozens of bugle calls and special drum beats that the soldier had to memorize in order to be moved about the battlefield efficiently. Musicians on a battlefield had more than a decorative function. The officers and men, all being raw recruits, discipline was very galling to them, and as they would be brought under rigid military discipline, a large amount of first-class swearing could be heard every day. But soon the boys began to learn the old soldier tricks and learned to yield gracefully to the inevitable when they could not dodge the officers. James R. Binford, 15th Mississippi Infantry. The object of all the drill was only partly to move the men about the field. It was also to train them to obey instantly and without questions, something that these volunteers would never entirely do willingly. North and South they came to fight, not to parade, and even after 4 years of war, many a Reb and Yank still did not see the use of discipline nor feel the least inclined to yield any of his prized personal independence. Blind obedience simply did not dwell within him. "I love my country as well as anyone," said a Georgia boy, "but I don't believe in the plan of making myself a slave." Not one of them did, and it is not mere hyperbole that led the officers and others since to claim them to be the best fighters and the worst soldiers America has ever borne. Young Confederates held their equipment belts together with belt plates like these, from Maryland at the top, Alabama in the center, and Virginia at the bottom. 3 Confederate soldiers, all from the same regiment, wear 3 different hats with their uniforms, evidence that regulations were honored, mostly in the breech, thanks to shortages. A tattered palmetto flag once carried by a South Carolina regiment and displaying their crudely fashioned fighting motto, "Our rights we defend." Union soldiers west of the Appalachians rest around their stacked arms, the day's drill behind them. And we will stop there for the day. I hope you guys are still enjoying it. I hope you guys are getting some knowledge about the Civil War from this book. I will jump back in and make a new video very shortly, and I hope to see you soon. Bye, guys.